Hey folks, today we're going to learn a little bit of JavaScript, basically just a quick introduction to JavaScript, and then we'll write a little bit of code just to show you how it works. So what is JavaScript? So JavaScript is one of the three main languages that makes the web work. HTML, CSS, and JavaScript are really what powers the web. HTML and CSS control how a website displays, and JavaScript is used whenever anything sort of happens on the web, whenever there's an interaction or any kind of animation or any sort of movement, whenever anything it goes beyond just being sort of displayed. That's what JavaScript is used for, and I'll show you some examples of what I mean by that as we go along. So JavaScript is what's called a scripting language. It's not technically a programming language because it's used strictly on the web, but it does operate a lot like any other computer programming language. So if you're familiar with Python or any other computer programming language, you're going to see a lot of similarities. And if you're not, learning JavaScript is a great intro into computer programming because you'll learn a lot of the concepts sort of along the way. So JavaScript traditionally is what was called a client-side script, which means that it operates in the browser, right? It as opposed to some sort of programming language like PHP, which is another web programming language, which really runs on the server and then outputs HTML. JavaScript, the magic of JavaScript sort of happens right in your browser. It's processed by your browser, and you can view source and see JavaScript and all that kind of stuff. And that's traditionally how JavaScript works. Increasingly, there have been JavaScript technologies like Node.js and React.js that actually are server-side JavaScript technology. So things are sort of changing, and in the last, say 5 or 10 years, JavaScript has become significantly more powerful, and people have used it to do lots of sort of new and interesting things. So JavaScript is unquestionably the language of data visualization. If you're going to make interactive graphics on the web, JavaScript is the way to do that. And one of the main reasons for that is because Mike Bostock, formerly of the New York Times, made a JavaScript library called D3.js, which stands for Data-Driven Documents. And it was specifically made for data visualizations on the web. And in many ways, it was specifically made for data visualizations in journalism on the web, since he made it for the New York Times. But it's sort of the de facto data visualization library. That said, D3 is very complicated. It has a really high learning curve. I'll show you guys some D3 in a couple classes just to sort of help you get your feet wet with it. But that's not what mostly we're going to use to make data visualizations in this class. There's lots of other ways to make data viz with JavaScript as well, including just using what we call vanilla JavaScript, which is JavaScript without any libraries, where you just sort of write all the code yourself. That's a great way to make data visualizations, especially sort of custom things that maybe don't rely completely on charts and graphs. But there's other libraries as well. So our focus in this class, because this is not a programming course, is really just to sort of help you guys get your feet wet with JavaScript. We're going to use a JavaScript library called Charts.js, and I'll explain what a JavaScript library is. It's basically just like a set of code and functions that are pre-written for you, that you can call into your code and take advantage of, so you don't have to write it all yourself. So Charts.js, for example, has lots of chart types that have already been created using JavaScript, and you can tap into their functions and create your own graphics based on the work that they've already done. It's basically you just change some things in their code, and it will create graphics for you. And there's lots of great JavaScript libraries out there. I would compare it to something like Bootstrap, if you're familiar with that in HTML, where you call in Bootstrap's code, and it has all kind of functionality that's available to you as a result. So, as I'm teaching you these intro to JavaScript concepts today, and as we're looking at code, don't get too caught up or overwhelmed. you're not going to have to write JavaScript yourself in this course. All you're going to be asked to do is modify other people's scripts. And that's really a great way to learn JavaScript, or any programming language for that matter. But it doesn't seem fair to drop you right into using these JavaScript libraries without teaching you some JavaScript fundamentals first. Excuse me. So that's really what today's video and today's class is about, is just teaching you those basic fundamentals. So when you're working with other people's code, you've got some sort of basis of knowledge for what you're looking at, okay? So the way JavaScript works is it goes inside HTML. So we're not going to go over HTML or CSS in this class since interactive design and development was a prereq to this course. I'm going to go ahead and assume that you guys already know that and remember it. So this is a basic HTML document, right? We've got our body tag that we've opened and we've closed. This is where our HTML content goes within the body. And underneath our HTML content, that's where our JavaScript goes. And if we're writing JavaScript directly in our HTML, which is a way that we will do it sometimes, and I will show you another way to do it also, right? We would start with a script tag, we would write our JavaScript code, and then we would close the script tag. So this is just sort of the basic structure of how it's set up in HTML. You can also write your JavaScript in a separate document. This is the preferred way to do it and how we will do it in this class for the most part, where in the head of your HTML document, you are calling in another document where you've written your script. So in this case, we've got a document called scriptname.js where we've written our JavaScript and we're just calling it into the head of our HTML document and it'll execute right there. Sometimes, in fact, we call that in at the bottom of the body, depending on what we're doing, but we will cross that bridge when we come to it. Okay, so let's talk about some basic elements of JavaScript. Okay, and the first thing we're going to talk about, just to get our feet wet, is a JavaScript function called getElementById. So let's click on this link, and we're going to use these W3 Schools tutorials, which are just a great way to sort of see how some JavaScript works. Okay, so let's take a look at this piece of code over here on the left. So we've got, let's look down in our body. We can see it says JavaScript in the body surrounded by an H2 tag. That's that right there. And then we've got a P with an ID of demo. And that's this element right here. So let's take a look at what this script is doing. You can see this is writing inline JavaScript. So right inside the body, we're opening our script and we're closing it. And here's where our JavaScript is written. So what we're doing here is we're grabbing this ID of demo and we're adding the words my first JavaScript inside of that ID. So let's look at how JavaScript does that. It does it using this getElementById. So that's a function that's written directly into JavaScript. And so we're calling it, we're saying document. Okay, so within our document, get the element with the ID of demo. Okay, so that's what it's doing right here. It's grabbing that element with the ID of demo. And then it's saying change the inner HTML inside that demo to equal my first JavaScript. So that's what it's doing. And we could change my first JavaScript to say whatever below data viz class. And now it's saying that, right? So we could really change that to say whatever we want. So let's see, anything else we want to look at here? All right. So that's basically how getElementById works. So there's a number of these sort of display methods, right? Like here we used .innerHTML, right? So this first part is it's telling JavaScript what element to target. In this case, an ID somewhere in your HTML with an ID of demo. And here we're modifying that element by using inner HTML, but there's a number of ways you can modify HTML, what we call display methods, right? So the first one is, like we just said, that getElementById and change the inner HTML. In this case, we're actually performing like a mathematical operation. We're adding 5 and 6 together. This is set up, and let's get rid of some of this stuff So all we have here is our ID of demo, right? And we're targeting that here with getElementById. And then we're changing the inner HTML to 5 plus 6. And of course, we could change that to anything. We could make it 55 plus 65, and it'll do that math for us. We could also make it a string. So whatever we want to change that inner HTML to, we can. Great. So there's some other display methods as well. We could use document.write. So let's see how this works. So you'll see in this case, we're actually not targeting an element by ID, right? We're literally just writing something in our document. So this will appear wherever this piece of script goes. So in this case, you can see it's calling my first web page, my first paragraph over here. Never call document.write. After the document has finished loading, it will overwrite the whole document. Okay, that just means if you have like a button and you use document.write, it'll overwrite everything else. But this is executing where it appears in the code. And again, we could change this to do whatever we want. In this case, it's performing this mathematical operation. We could also make it display a string. We want to put quotes around words, but if we're using numbers and we want to do math, we don't put quotes around it. And again, wherever we put this in our document is where it will appear. Great, so that's document.write. Let's see what's next here. Oh, okay, so this one will show how, okay, so this attaches document.write to a button. So it's got, we've got a button, and we're adding this JavaScript action called onClick, JavaScript method. So we're saying when you click the button, document.write 5 plus 6. But here, because the document's already loaded and we write document.write, and we're calling document.write, it's going to overwrite everything else, right? So it just makes everything else disappear. Probably not the best thing to do in that case. Okay, here's one called window.alert. So this is how we would make a little, what we call an alert pop-up window, right? So here we have this alert window, and this is going to pop up when the page loads, right? So we run that, the little pop-up loads, you hit OK, and then you see the page behind it. And again, you could say whatever you want. And that's window.alert. Okay, you don't see those too often these days, but that's definitely something you can do if you want to give your user a message right when they're first coming to the page. And it can also be good for debugging. So, right, you can also do math within window.alert. Okay, now let's look at console log. Speaking of debugging, so sometimes, and we'll do an example of this, I think, when we're writing code here next. Sometimes you want to write a log to the console, which basically all you're doing here is testing. So if we go to inspect, and you can do this in either Firefox or Chrome, and then you click on console, this is going to show you what's happening in your browser as things are working. And you can log things to the console, right? So you can see as I move around the page, it's logging certain things that are happening. But I can log things myself to basically to see if my JavaScript is working. So in this case, I'm just going to log. See, I clicked that and 11 appeared down there. And because a lot of other, see, there you go. It's right there. So we could use that to our advantage to sort of test things as we're going along. Okay, so those are our display methods. So one of the sort of integral parts of any programming language are going to be variables, right? And there are 3 ways to declare variables in JavaScript, using var, let, or const. And these are sort of in reverse order as to the sort of modernity or preference of them. Const is the preferred way to do it these days with modern JavaScript. Let is a little bit older, and var is sort of the original way. You have to be familiar with all 3 because you never know what you're going to see when you're using other people's codes. But all 3 of these are ways to declare variables. So let's take a look at what that means. So here we are, you can also declare variables automatically, which is what we're doing in this first one. We're not even using let or var or const. Okay, so let's see what we're doing here with variables. Here we're taking x and we're assigning it to 5. We're taking y and we're assigning it to 6. And then we're declaring a new variable called z, and we're saying z equals x plus y. So let's see how that works. So we've got our page. We're saying in this example, x, y, and z are undeclared, and then we declare them, right? So we've got x equals 5, y equals 6, and then we're saying z equals x plus y. And then we are writing a little document.write statement, get element by ID demo up here. We're going to change the inner HTML, and then this in quotes just means display this in the HTML. And then we're saying plus add the variable z. And in this case, the variable z is using two other variables, x and y. So it's taking 5 and adding it to 6. And we could also say, right, like we could just get rid of all this and we could just say inner HTML equals x, and that's going to display 5. We could have it display y, and that's going to display 6, right? Or we could have it show z, in which case it's going to add those two variables together. So that's basically how variables work, right? You can use them to display content and also to do operations. And that's going to be a really key concept to understand in JavaScript or any programming language. So here we do the same thing using var. Right here we're saying the variable x equals 5, variable y equals 6, variable z equals x plus y. And this is a good thing to do to actually declare your variables. You only need to do it once. Your code will fail oftentimes otherwise. Here we're doing the same thing using let, and here we're doing the same thing using const. So it can be a little bit confusing because there's these 3 different ways to do it. You just have to remember that all 3 of them basically do the same thing. Here they're even mixing them up, which is even more confusing. So when to use var, let, and const. So always use const if the value should not be changed. So, I think the real takeaway here is const is the more modern way to do it, the best way to do it. Only use let if you can't use const. Only use var if you must support old browsers. So that's sort of the advice I would go with. So we're going to see variables being used just constantly in every piece of JavaScript that we write today. It's sort of the way that all programming languages work. So we've got different mathematical operators or just operators here that we can use to do different things. We already saw how addition works. You can also subtract. If you want to multiply, you use the little star. Division is a slash. We're going to use increment and decrement. Today we'll use increment, but these are ways that we can sort of create loops where we go through arrays of variables and stuff. And there's lots of different operators, and we can see how they work here. So here we're saying we're doing addition. Here all right, let's take a look at this one. So here we're doing a little bit more complicated math, just a little bit, right? We're defining a as 3. We're saying let x equal 100 plus 50, which is in parentheses, so we do that first, and then we're multiplying that by a, which is 3, so it's basically 150 times 3, right, equals 450. So that's how operators work. We also have different data types, and you guys will be familiar with this just from working with data. There are 8 different data types in JavaScript. The ones that we'll work with mostly are numbers, strings, and objects. So a number is just to write a number. A string is text, and objects we'll get to in just 1 second. First, we'll talk about arrays, though, which is a way that we store multiple values in a single variable, right? So we're defining a variable here called cars, and then we're using these brackets to store multiple values within that variable of cars. We can see how that works here. So here we're just sort of creating arrays, right? And we're displaying that Probably not generally what you would do with an array, but you guys will see how arrays can be useful as we sort of do some actual coding here in a little bit. Objects are also variables, but they contain many values. So you can think of it as a more complex array. So in this case, we're defining our variable car, and then we're sort of assigning values to variables within the variable. So we've got a car, and we're saying the type of the car is a Fiat, the model is 500, and the color is white. And the purpose here is we can sort of create a number of these objects, so we have a number of different cars that we're sort of defining that we can loop through. So let's just take a look at some examples here. So here's some different examples of objects, right? So we've got an object here. Oh, this is a great example. Okay, so we've defined our variable of person, and within that object, we've got the first name of John, the last name of Joe, the age of 50, and the eye color of blue. And so now we can display some of the data from that object. So we're saying, okay, get element by ID demo. So that's this up here. We're saying, okay, change the inner HTML within demo. All right. And then we're saying, change that inner HTML to, first we want to display person.firstname. So person.firstname, right? So it's saying grab the variable person or the object person, and then display first name from within person, right? You can see it's doing that over here, John, and then we're just adding a string here is, and then to grab person.age, so that's person.age is 50, and then add the string years old, right? So we could also say, we could say person first name plus person dot last name is 50 years old, right? If we wanted to add the last name in as well. Well, that didn't work. Oops, I missed my plus there. There we go. Oh, undefined. Last name. Okay. Got to make sure you're getting that syntax right. Okay. And you can see it didn't put a space there. So if I wanted that space, I could add a space like that. There we go. All right, so that's how we might use an object. Functions are sort of a way that we will take all these other things that we just learned, objects and arrays and variables and different write methods, and we will put them inside functions so that they work together to do things. So let's take a look at an example of a function. So here what we're doing is we're creating a function that we're saying function. We're just telling JavaScript, hey, I'm about to write a function. We give it a name. It's whatever name you want. And then we're adding some parameters here. These are sort of dynamic variables that we can add in when we call the function later. You'll see that we do that below. And then we're just saying, okay, return. That just means run. And we're saying P1 times P2, which are up here. We don't really know what those are yet, but we will define them when we call the function. So here we are. We're saying let result equal my function. Right, so that's that function. And here we're saying 4 and 3. So what we're doing there is we're defining P1 and P2, those parameters. And then we're basically running that function by calling, right? So we're assigning this variable here. We're calling that function within that variable. And then we're saying, grab demo, change the inner HTML, add the variable result, which in this case runs that function, where it comes up here and runs my function, uses the 4 and the 3 that we passed to the parameter, and then takes 4 and multiplies it by 3. Right? Functions are where we sort of put everything together, and it starts to get a little bit more complicated. We'll look at plenty of examples of how that works as we write some code here. Right? So a function is a block of code designed to perform a particular task. So basically, right, so we call it, we have our parameters, and and then inside these curly brackets is the code to be executed. So this is sort of the setup of a function. All right, so now that I've thoroughly confused you, let's actually write some JavaScript. There's so much more you can do with it. It's really like learning JavaScript is it's a journey, right? It's a journey if you do it, will happen over a long period of time. And the best way to do it is to sort of jump in and start modifying other people's code, think of things you want to do, and kind of try to learn how to do them. There's so many more great tutorials on W3 schools, and also lots of great Code Academy tutorials that I know you guys are working through now. So with that, let's go ahead and jump over and write some code. All right, folks, let's write a little bit of JavaScript. Everything I'm going to show you today is in a GitHub folder on our class repo, and there's a link to that in Elms. So all this code is available to you. I wouldn't suggest necessarily trying to code it out yourself right now. Maybe just watch and try to understand. But part of our lab exercise today will be you trying to recreate some of these if you want to. But it's all available here. The first thing we're going to go over is in this folder called Basics. So let's get started. I'm going to open up VS Code, and I have a little folder I'm working in here just called JS Demo. I'm just going to make a new document. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to create like a quick HTML page. So I've got just the basic structure for an HTML page here, and I'll go ahead and save this as index.html. And so what I'm doing here is I'm calling in, right inside the body, I'm calling in a JavaScript file, right, which does not exist yet. So I'll go ahead and create that. So I'm going to call this, what did I call it? Okay, so I'll save this as javascript.js. So you could call this anything you want as long as the extension is .js. You could, oftentimes you might have more than one script, so you might name it something a little bit more specific than javascript.js, but this will do for our purposes today. Okay, and I'm just going to go ahead and open this up in a browser using this Go Live extension in VS Code, which just automatically updates things. So here we've opened this up in Chrome, and there's nothing going on, right? There's nothing here yet. Okay, so let's write a little JavaScript. So let's just start out by doing an alert. So we'll do alert. And this will just let us know that things are working, right? So we'll say alert, hello world, and we want to end with a little semicolon. And I'll save that. We can see, okay, now we've got an alert, so we know everything's sort of hooked up correctly there. Now you will often want to write comments in your JavaScript because you want to tell yourself what you're doing and what's going on here. So this is a single line comment. So we could say like, maybe we'll say like, this is an alert. Sometimes you need more than a single line comment. If you want more than a single line comment, you do it like this. So you start it like that. We'll say, okay, this is a multi-line. And then when we want to end our comment, we say, there we go. Okay, so that's how you write comments in JavaScript. So let's go ahead and write a, let's put this up here. Okay, great. And really, let's go ahead and hide that. I'll just turn that into a comment so it doesn't display anymore. Okay, so let's write a conditional statement, okay? So I'm about to write a conditional statement. I was writing myself a little comment there. All right, so let's make a variable. Let's call it amount. Let's it equals 5,000. Great. So let's write an conditional statement, right, which is basically an if-then statement. So if this is true, do this, and you can also do, otherwise do this. So we'll say if, and we're going to use that variable amount. We'll say if it is less than 1,000, then, so we're going to write our then within these curly brackets, right? This is essentially a function. Alert, it is less than 1,000. So you'll notice nothing happens here, right? Well, that's because amount is not less than 1,000, right? But let's make it 10,000. So it's less than 10,000. And now it works, right? It is less than 10,000. Wonderful. Okay. So we could write this, my comma would have gone there. So let's take this back to 1,000, right? So this isn't popping up any kind of alert because amount is more than 1,000. So let's add an else statement on here. Else, so if amount is less than 1,000, alert, it is less than 1,000. Otherwise, alert, it is more than 1. Let's put some commas here. All right. So it is more than 1,000, but let's change this to amount to 10,000. Now it will tell us it is, oh no, let's make it 500. Now it should tell us, okay, it is more than 1,000, okay. Oh, okay, if amount, man, I'm changing the wrong things here. Okay, so what we want to do is change this one. So we've made our amount 500, and we're evaluating if amount is less than 1,000 and delivering a message based on that, right? So 500. It is less than 1,000, right? If we change that to 5,000, it'll tell us it is more than 1,000. Great. So now we've created this nice conditional statement where we're evaluating the value of this variable right here. Wonderful. Okay, let's move on. Okay, what I want to show next is how we might attach a function to a button. So I'm going to get rid of all of this. And this, by the way, if you're following along at home, is button function right here. Let me just close that for the moment. I'm going to make our HTML page just slightly more complicated here, okay? Okay, so you can see we've got a headline, we've got some text, and we've got a button that says new headline. So you can see here, right, we've got our headline, which has got an ID of headline. We've got our text, and then we've got our button here, which has got an on-click call to a function called new headline. And that's what we're going to do is we're going to write that function. And of course, we're calling in our JavaScript document, which is right over here, which for the moment is empty. So let's write that function, right, that new headline function. So we're going to make a variable, and we're going to call it new headline. Or no, we're not new. We're going to call it headline 2. And we're just going to say it equals okay, great. So now we have a new variable called headline 2, and we've assigned the string new headline to that. Now let's write our function. We're going to write a function, and we're going to call it new headline. In this case, we don't need to pass any parameters to it, so we're just going to do that. And then we're going to make our curly brackets. So here what we've done is we've declared that we're making a function. We've named the function new headline and done our little parentheses there, which we don't have any parameters, so it's empty. And now we've made our curly brackets, and this is where we're going to write whatever's going to happen when that function is called. Okay, so we want to make this pretty simple. We're going to say document dot get element by ID. And you see, this is how JavaScript likes you to write things, with the using uppercase, no spaces, obviously, but also not dashes or underscores. It wants you just to use, what we generally do is we just use uppercase letters to sort of separate words, and we usually start with a lowercase, and that's sort of what JavaScript prefers. All right, so we're going to get element by ID, and we're going to get our element headline. If you guys remember back in our HTML, that's just this little element right here, right? It's got an ID of headline, so we're getting element by ID, and that ID is headline. And then we're going to change the inner HTML, and we're going to make it equal headline 2, which is this variable up here, new headline. So what should happen, if we've done this correctly, is that when new headline, the function new headline is called, it grabs that element with the ID of headline and it changes it to be the variable headline 2, which in this case are the words new headline. Okay, so we've attached that function, new headline, to our button through onClick here. So let's save all this and see if it works. I'm using Greek text, so the browser wants to try to figure out what I'm doing. All right, so I clicked new headline and it worked. Beautiful. And of course we could change that to be whatever we want. We could make it 5 plus 5, and it would change it to 10. We could also do this without the variable here, right? We could just say, we could have just written the string right inside of our function, and that would have worked too. So lots of ways to do it. Okay, cool. That's great. Let's take this a little further. I'm gonna go ahead and get rid of all this stuff. What we're gonna do now is we're gonna take a look at this one called dynamic page, where things are gonna get a little bit more complicated. We're gonna write a more complex function now. All right, so let's set up our HTML page. Very simple. We've got our headline, we've got our text. No reason to have that space there. And we're calling in our JavaScript, which for the moment is blank. So if we take a look at this page, it's basically the same thing we had a minute ago, but it's even simpler because we've gotten rid of the button. Okay, we're basically going to do what we did a minute ago, but we're not going to use a button. We're going to make the headline change dynamically based on an array changing every couple seconds. Okay, so let's give that a shot. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to define a few variables. Okay, so let's first, we're going to make a variable called headline array. Okay, so this is an array of headlines. And it's just, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 headlines here, right? Next headline, another headline, yet another, and final headline. And so we'll use this to loop through to grab headlines to display. Next, I want to grab a variable. I want to create a variable called headline index and just set it to 0. And so you'll see how we use this, but the thing to know is that when JavaScript counts something, it starts at 0. It doesn't start at 1. Okay, so if we're going to loop through this array, these values are going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, not 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's why we're setting this to 0. We're going to tell our function to start, to evaluate what the current headline index is, and we're going to have it start with 0, which is going to be that first one. This will make more sense in a minute, okay? And we're going to define one more variable right now that we're going to call headline length. And for this, we're going to use a JavaScript operation that's just like sort of built into JavaScript. So we're going to use something called length, which will like count the number of items in an array. So I'm basically saying, okay, the variable headline length equals headline array, which is this variable up here, dot length. So this is basically just counting these. So it's basically just setting it like it's counting at 0, 1, 2, 3, right? So this is basically saying like variable headline length equals 3, but we're doing it like dynamically because this is going to change as we go along. Okay, so let's write our function. Okay, so we are going to write a function to loop through the headline array. So we're going to say function, and I'm going to name it change headline. Wonderful. Okay, so I'm going to make a new variable called headline element, and that's going to equal document dot get element by ID headline. So all I've done in this function so far is I've like defined a new variable which is called headline element, and it gets element by ID headline. So basically I'm just grabbing this element right here because this is where we're going to make our magic happen. Okay. So now I'm going to make another new variable, and I'm going to call it new headline, and I'm going to make that equal headline array, and then I'm going to make some brackets here, and I'm going to say headline index. Okay, so what's this doing? It's making a new variable called new headline, and it's saying grab the headline array, which is this up here, and then grab headline index, which we set to 0. So basically what this is doing is it's grabbing this first one right here, right? So it's assigning the variable new headline to the first element within this array. Great. Now let's test this out. Let's do an alert of new headline, and this is basically just a way that I can like test to see if what I've done so far is working. Now I'm going to save it, and we'll go open our thing, and nothing's working, right? The alert is not coming up, and the reason for that is because we haven't called this function anywhere. If you remember in our last example, we called the function on the button, and we haven't done that yet. So what we're going to do here is we're going to run the function in a different way. We're going to do it using an operation called window.onLoad. So we're basically just saying like, hey, when the window loads, run the function change headline. And now, okay, perfect. So now what's happened is when the window loads, it runs this function, and what we've done is we've basically grabbed new headline here, right, through what I showed you a minute ago, and we're alerting. We're saying, okay, tell me in an alert window what that variable is, and what I want it to say is new headline, right? Great. Okay, perfect. Next headline. Yeah. Now we could test and make sure, like if we said headline index is 1, it's going to grab another headline. Okay, so that works. Great. Okay, so now you sort of understand how alert can be used. Like I'm not done with my function, but I wanted to test to see if that was working so far before I go any further. I could also have used console.log. Okay, so I'm just going to hide that because I don't really need it right now. Okay, cool. So now let's see here. First headline. Okay, perfect. All right, now let's change. So let's say. So what we want to do now is change this headline to be new headline, right? So we'll grab headline element dot inner HTML. Remember, headline element is defined as that headline, right? Get element by ID headline. So we're going to grab that, and we're going to change the dot inner HTML, and we're going to make it equal new headline, which we defined right here, which is this, right? Okay, so let's see if that worked. Yay, next headline. Perfect. All right, moving right along. So now we've figured out a way to dynamically change that headline to the first thing in our array. Now what we want to do is we want to create a loop that goes through and changes it like on a sort of an interval, right? At some certain amount of time, right? So what I'm going to say is now I'm going to say headline index plus plus. And what that's going to do is it is going to take headline index and it's going to increment it by 1, right? So every time this function runs, it's then going to change headline index. It's going to increase it by 1. So we've started to create our loop. Okay, so what we need to do now is we need to actually add one more variable up here that creates the loop. So I'm going to say variable. I'm going to call a variable called my loop. And I'm going to say set interval change headline. I'm going to say comma 1000. So that's like every 10 seconds. It's going to run through this again, basically, right? And now I'm going to call that as a parameter. I'll call my loop down here. Okay, so this is getting a little confusing, but basically what's happening is it's we're calling it here on page load. It runs through it, it increments it, and then every 10 seconds it runs through it again, right? So let's see if this actually works. I guess it's 1 second, not 10 seconds. Okay, so we've created this loop. That's awesome. So it's going through our arrays and displaying each of those headlines every second, right? So let's review. We've got our array. We're setting our headline index to 0. We're defining the length, which we haven't used this yet. We're gonna use that in a second. And then we've created this loop, this variable called my loop, where we've set the interval to call the function change headline every second. Now we've got our function called change headline. We're grabbing the element that we want to change out of our HTML, which is the ID of headline. We're creating a variable called new headline, in which we're calling the item out of this array with our headline index, which in this case is 0, so it's that item. And then we're just changing the headline in the HTML to be that new headline. And then we're incrementing headline index by 1. Now here we're running the function on load, and we're adding in the my loop variable, which sets the interval to rerun the function every second. Okay, so that's great, but you can see it's not working perfectly, right? Because it gets to the end and it doesn't know what to do. It gets to the final headline and then it goes to the next one and it's like, hey, there's nothing there. Okay, so we're going to fix that. We're going to write an if statement that fixes that. Okay, we're going to say if, okay, if headline index is greater than or equal to headline length, then clear interval my loop. Okay, awesome. Let's see what this is doing. Okay, so we're saying if headline index, which is this right here, remember is being incremented, if that's higher than or equal to headline length, which you'll remember headline length is counting the total number of items. So in this case, it's like 3 or 4 if you're starting from 1. So if once this gets up to 3, right? So if headline index, which we're incrementing, is equal to or more than the total length, the total number of items in headline array, then clear this interval, right? Clear interval my loop. So stop. Instead of set interval, clear interval just says like, stop doing that, okay? Stop rerunning it over and over again. All right, let's see if this works. All right, it works, beautiful. So you can see it gets a little complicated, right? And of course, you will never be asked to do anything like this in this class, but it's just to demonstrate a nice little clean demonstration of how JavaScript works and how all these different elements that we learn sort of work together. All right, that's where we're going to stop today. I do have a class exercise for you guys today that is not graded. Okay, it's really, let me double check that. It is not graded. Intro to JavaScript exercise. 0 points. Okay, so you do not need to turn anything in. And you could recreate a few of the examples that we reviewed in class. We actually didn't do this one, show hide, which is jQuery. I'll show you guys that in the future. So if when you're working on this, I would just focus on number 1 or number 2. Okay, so I've supplied you with all the code that you would need to recreate these and all the output. So it's really just a matter of, retyping it or taking a look at them and sort of getting a little bit deeper and trying to do some of these yourself. Okay, thanks so much. I'll talk to you guys soon.